All right, today we've got quite a bit to talk about when it comes to the weather. There are some notable shifts happening, and I want to break it all down for you so you know what to expect. Kicking things off, let's talk about the severe weather potential today. Right now, there's a marginal risk of severe storms over parts of Missouri, Kansas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. For the most part, we're looking at a day where the main threats will be damaging winds and large hail. But there is a small tornado risk. And when I say small, I really mean it. This is probably one of the two tiniest tornado risk areas I've seen in a while. It's concentrated over a pretty small section of the map, covering parts of southwestern Missouri, northwest Arkansas, and extreme northeastern Oklahoma. But before we get into the details, hit the subscribe button, like this video, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for your support. If we zoom in a little more, this area does include the southeastern side of Joplin, Missouri, as well as places like Rogers, Arkansas, Claremore, and Grove in Oklahoma. Now, the Storm Prediction Center isn't necessarily expecting a widespread tornado outbreak, but they are being very specific about where they think a quick spin up could happen. That's why they've drawn this little 2 risk right over this spot. So while it's important to stay weather aware, there's no reason to be overly concerned. This is the kind of setup where a brief, weak tornado could form, but the overall chances are low. Looking ahead to tomorrow, though, we're dealing with a more widespread severe weather setup. A larger slight risk zone has been outlined from Shreveport, Louisiana, stretching all the way up through Memphis, Tennessee. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if this area gets expanded a bit farther to the north and east, or even slightly south and east, because the system is looking like it could have a little more energy to work with. Just like today, damaging winds and large hail will be the main threats, but we can't completely rule out a couple of isolated tornadoes either. As this cold front pushes south and east, we're also going to see some strong winds developing across the Rockies and spilling into Texas. And that's why we have a critical fire weather risk in parts of New Mexico and Texas. So the fire danger extends well beyond that too, stretching all the way up into Kansas, Nebraska, and South Dakota. Even in the southeastern U.S., we've got an elevated fire weather risk on the eastern side of the Appalachian Mountains today. So if you're in any of these areas, just be mindful of the conditions and take the necessary precautions to prevent any fires from getting out of hand. Now, let's talk about how the radar might shape up later today. By around 4 p.m. Eastern, we're expecting to see some scattered light rain showers across Ohio, New York, and into parts of Canada. Up in Quebec and parts of Maine, some of this precipitation will actually be in the form of snow, but it'll be pretty isolated. Later in the evening, probably around 10 or 11 p.m., we should start to see some thunderstorms firing up right in that small tornado risk zone I mentioned earlier. Meanwhile, farther north, a mix of rain and snow will be falling over Minnesota, parts of Manitoba, and Ontario. Some of the heavier snow totals will be focused on the upper peninsula of Michigan and northern Wisconsin, where we could see a solid 3 to 6 inches of accumulation. But for southern Ontario and western New York, it looks like most of the snow will come and go too quickly to really pile up. So while there will be some flakes flying, it's not going to turn into a significant winter storm. What's really interesting is that this entire system is tied into both the snow up north and the severe weather in the south. As storms develop over Oklahoma this evening, they're going to intensify quickly, producing some large hail and strong wind gusts. Some of these storms could even generate isolated downbursts, particularly over southern Missouri and northwest Arkansas. The tornado risk remains low. And in fact, I think by the time we reach midnight or 1, the tornado threat will be completely over. But that doesn't mean the storms will be done. This system will continue pushing east, bringing lightning and thunder into the St. Louis area by early morning. As we move into Sunday, the severe threat will expand again. That's why I think we might see the slight risk area adjusted a bit. It could stretch farther north and east depending on how things evolve. There's a decent potential for damaging winds along the Ohio River Valley, possibly even reaching Louisville. And down in parts of Tennessee, northern Mississippi, and northern Alabama, there will be a higher chance of storms producing large hail and maybe even an isolated tornado or two. Something else to watch for is a developing squall line, which could move through eastern Kentucky and down into middle and eastern Tennessee. This line of storms could cause some significant wind damage, even in areas that are only under a marginal risk. So even if you're not directly in the higher risk zone, don't let your guard down. If there's going to be any kind of notable tornado threat tomorrow, it'll likely come from a few isolated storms that form ahead of the main squall line. These storms will have a small window of opportunity to spin up tornadoes before the front catches up and forces everything into more of a linear mode. But once again, damaging winds and large hail will be the bigger story. And then as we head into Monday, the severe weather threat shifts toward southeast Georgia, northern Florida, and the Carolinas. But compared to the storms we've been dealing with recently, this one looks a lot less intense. Now, let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture. The reason we're seeing all this activity is because of a dip in the jet stream, which is fueling both the snow up north and the severe storms down south. But once this system moves out, we're going to enter a more stable weather pattern, at least for a little while. When I say stable, I don't mean completely quiet, but the jet stream is going to settle into a more stationary position for a few days. That's going to lead to a strong ridge building over the western U.S., where temperatures are expected to climb well above average. Places like Arizona, Utah, California, and Nevada could see near record heat, while the Ohio Valley and the Northeast will stay cooler than normal for a bit longer. Phoenix, for example, could even hit 100 degrees at some point this week. This ridge just keeps looking stronger and stronger the farther out we go. And according to the Climate Prediction Center, this pattern could last all the way through April 4th. This kind of setup usually leads to quieter weather overall. When we have big troughs digging into the west and ridges in the east, that's when we tend to see larger, more widespread severe weather outbreaks. But since the current pattern is flipped, it might help keep things calmer for a while. That said, we're still keeping an eye on a couple of areas later in the week. By Thursday and Friday, moisture will start returning to Texas and the Central Plains, which could lead to some isolated thunderstorms, maybe even some severe weather. And out in the Pacific Northwest, another atmospheric river will bring heavy rain and snow. Now let's take a look at precipitation for that same period, March 30th through April 5th. Out west, still looking very active. Again, that's classic for a negative PNA pattern. The drier than average zone expands across most of the south central states and even a bit into the central U.S. But as you get closer to Canada, the northern plains, the upper Midwest, the Great Lakes, and the Northeast, precipitation is looking above average. The mid-Atlantic and Southeast, pretty close to normal. Now, if we step back and look at what's already happened over the past 20 days, we have had some colder days recently, which has helped cut back on the intensity of the warmth. Looking at March 2nd through 22nd, we can see below normal temperatures in the west. That's once again been that negative PNA pattern at play. That's been a big driver of all the warmth in the central and eastern U.S. Now, I do think this is going to shift temporarily, but by the tail end of March, maybe those last 2, 3, 4 days, I think we're probably going to warm back up again. And when all's said and done, I expect the entire month of March to have looked a lot like this when we analyze the big picture. Now, can we start April on a cold note? Surprisingly, yes. We're going to look at that in the models in just a moment. So let's go ahead and bring up the European model. Looking at Saturday afternoon, March 22nd. So today we've got a low across the northern plains, bringing snowfall to the Rockies and some light snow to parts of the northern plains as well. We're also seeing some snow showers in the mountainous Northeast, but really nothing major until we get into the overnight hours. That's when we start to see some severe thunderstorms developing in Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, and Tennessee. That activity will likely push into Mississippi and Alabama as well. Now, we do have a level 2 out of 5 risk for severe weather. So not a major outbreak, but definitely something to keep an eye on. Expect some pretty nasty storms at times. As we go into Monday afternoon, thunderstorms will still be hanging around the southeast, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Virginia. In the northern part of that zone, probably more showers than anything, but down south, you can still hear some thunder. Meanwhile, a low pressure system over the Great Lakes is bringing some snowfall to that region, along with parts of Canada and the Northeast. Jumping ahead to Tuesday, the 25th, we see one of those colder days show up. Not much in terms of precipitation, but we've got a huge ridge in the west and a deep trough in the east. So colder air dominating the region for the day. Fast forwarding to April 1st, and something interesting pops up. The jet stream kind of flattens out, which could signal a pattern reset. Now, here's something weird I've noticed. And if you watch my videos regularly, you've probably heard me mention this before. But for some reason, the first of the month often brings about a pattern change. Obviously, the weather doesn't care about our calendars, but it's just a weird trend I've picked up on over the past 6 to 12 months. And then get this, the GF's model is trying to paint a full-blown mid-Atlantic snowstorm around March 31st into April 1st. Now, please take this with a huge grain of salt, because this would be absolutely insane. April 1st? Yeah, no one's going to believe that's happening. And we're 10 days out from this. So the chances of it actually playing out this way are well below 50. But hypothetically, if this setup were to happen, we'd be looking at a major coastal storm bringing snowfall from Kentucky and West Virginia through Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and even parts of New England. Again, super unlikely, but the models are hinting at it. So that's where we stand right now. If you enjoyed the update, make sure to hit that like button, leave a comment down below, and of course, subscribe if you haven't already. I upload every single day. So if you want to stay in the loop, make sure you've got notifications turned on. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.